Welcome to another conversation. My name is Kevin Tocci, and we are privileged to have our regular conversation with State Representative Alyson Sullivan-Almeida. Yes, it's been a bit, but she has been very busy, so we have a chance to chat with her. Welcome back. How are you?
Good, Kevin. Thanks for having me. I know I feel like we've been going at trying to schedule this for months now, so I'm so happy to finally be able to do it.
Well, you started a new legislative session in January, and from there, you have
hit the ground running.
You have been very active. I think the first thing we want to kind of talk about is you having a front row seat on the House Ways and Means this session. Talk to me, what's it like to be a part of that? Because it's not like you're just going to the State House.
Yeah.
You are mobile.
Yeah, so, it was my second session on being House Ways and Means. So, it has been very eventful. I really enjoy kind of seeing all different parts of the state. It's time consuming, that's for sure, but it's an important process, right? It's hearing from different department heads as well as constituents across the Commonwealth. What is their priorities when it comes to our state budget? Where are we having shortfalls and where can we improve? So having those meetings, they take some time, most definitely. I think we hit maybe 7 or 8 different locations throughout the state. And then, of course, we finalized our last meeting at the State House in the Gardner Room, which if you've ever, I'm assuming you've been there several times, is a big hearing room. And the hearing went for several hours, and that was the constituents' side to be able to speak on what's important to them and where we should be looking at funding.
What seemed to be the focus of the folks who would come before you, whether it was just residents, whether it was folks from the municipality, people from the education side? Was there some semblance of unity, or did everybody kind of have their wishes, whether it's we need more funding, we need more housing, we need more money for local aid? What was it?
I mean, I think you hit all of them, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's always a need for more and more and more. And I think one of the bigger points that we were hearing is regarding education. And it's very similar to our local towns, right? The biggest part of the budget is education, right? How much is being spent on education? What areas of education are we focusing in on? We heard from kind of, the different communities, the smaller communities, similar to like Abington, Whitman, East Bridgewater, those communities that almost get forgotten in the whole process, right? We're not the bigger cities. We don't have as many reps, representing the area. So they came out and they came out strong. I remember being out at UMass Amherst, and my amazing legislative aide, Catherine, she's a graduate of UMass Amherst. So she took the opportunity to take the ride with me out that way. And thank God for her, because I would have probably got lost several times. And I think because of her, we may have got lost with the parking lot. It's been built up quite a bit since she's been out there. But education was a big proponent, and there were all ages of constituents that came out to UMass Amherst, from young to older, regarding fully funding our education system and not forgetting about the urban communities and the rural communities at the same time. So there was a huge push for that, and hearing them and seeing their posts. I'll never forget, there was a little young girl, and I am horrible at guessing ages, but I would say no more than 10 years old, that says, please don't forget about me and my education. And I think that's important. We, especially some of, the western part of the state, which sometimes gets forgotten about, and they don't get as much funding from the state. So those are the areas that we need to focus on.
It's interesting, at the onset of COVID, I believe that the state legislature passed the Student Opportunity Act. There was also an ed reform of 93 which
I think my father was a part of. I think he might have been the deciding vote.
and so the idea of that was to kind of help the gateway cities, those communities. How have, knowing that this has been in the works, this legislation, these measures, but yet we're still struggling to fund proper education. As a legislator, you get to see behind the scenes. What's some of the conversations that were going on during the Ways and Means when it came to funding for education, and knowing that this budget has jumped from the current fiscal year of 25, I think it's almost $6 billion. So it's going from like a $56 billion to $62 billion that's being proposed.
Yep, and that's the thing, we're around education, and the conversations I've had with constituents, both in district and out of district, is regarding our special education. We are seeing, especially a post-COVID era, more and more kids either on an IEP or needing some form of an IEP regarding their education. I got an article sent to me recently regarding I believe it was around special education. I'm trying to remember if it was literacy. I believe it was literacy in the sense of what the fourth graders, so I believe the fourth graders are what the kindergarten would have been for 2020 COVID era, fourth or fifth. They're not at the reading level they should be at. And what are we doing, and how do we change that so that we get those kids that are the quote unquote COVID era, right, to the standard that they need to be at? How do we need to change our ways around education? And, we're seeing it throughout the whole district regarding education around, whether it be special education on all three towns, but also in Whitman-Hanson regarding regional transportation. And that was a big proponent for myself, is advocating for 100% reimbursement. It's the state requirement around regional transportation. They should be fully funding it. It shouldn't be this underfunded or non-funded requirement that the towns are going to have to be, burdened with. If we're saying we require it on the state level, then we should also have a funding source behind it. We've heard many talks on the state level and House debates where it's, where's the funding source coming from? We need to do an evaluation. If we're going to change the law here or there, we need to know where the funding source is coming from. And that's a big proponent, is education, because it's one of the biggest parts of our local budgets.
If you were to do a little bit of an assessment here, how would you describe the overall fiscal direction of this year's budget compared to the current fiscal year or previous fiscal years that you've been a part of?
My first couple of years were under Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito, and they did a phenomenal job at having revenue come in, and they were very smart. Governor Baker was very intelligent when it came to having a very balanced budget when it came to priorities and where those priorities needed to go. It's sad to have a seat in the House and see, almost like just because money is there doesn't mean money needs to be spent, right? I think we need to really look at where we're placing our priorities. And it's unfortunate, there's a lot of priorities that the House has focused in on that I don't agree with. A lot of it around the illegal immigrants that are being housed throughout our Commonwealth, the funding sources that have been behind that. When I'm looking at our communities that are nickel and diming how to spend the money that they have in their state aid, if we took even a fraction of what we spent on housing thousands and thousands of individuals with kind of no oversight, we probably could have not put our cities and towns in the predicament that they're in this fiscal budget season. So it's unfortunate, but it's hard to watch, I guess, if that's the way to put it.
Would you say that there were any wins for your district in the committee's version of the budget that you were proud to see included, or at least discussed? Yeah,
of course. There was an increase to the per pupil aid, which I think is obviously a win across the board. We got some local earmarks, and I'm hesitant to say a price tag on those just because we've seen in the past how the governor has to make some cuts, and it ends up being our local earmarks, right? So we did get several, wins across the district for Abington, Whitman, East Bridgewater. I was proud to be able to advocate for those priorities around, public health, our local law enforcement and public service, our DPWs, and even our schools and our libraries, but at the same token, in our seniors. But I'm always kind of reluctant to say how much we got. But I know we were able to get some few wins locally for that as well.
It's worth noting, talking about the House budget, which I believe your colleagues in the House voted on, the end of April. You were one of a handful of legislators who voted against the final version of the House. Why did you ultimately decide to oppose it?
It's hard, when you take that overall vote, right? I think you can look at one way or the other how you could vote. You could vote yes for several reasons. You could vote no for other reasons. Some of the bigger reasons why I voted no is because, we've all heard about the millionaires tax, right? There was a big push to tax millionaires at a higher increase to be able to get more revenue for our schools and our roads, right? It was going to be towards education and transportation. We took up that budget, that supplemental budget, surplus budget. I believe it was like maybe a week or two prior to our House debate on our House budget. And in that, it looked like we were getting more money for regional transportation, right? Where it was going to be finally 100% fully funded because of the way it looked from the governor's budget to the supplemental budget from the millionaire's tax. However, what they did is they took the money out of the House budget. So when we released our House budget, they decreased the governor's budget for regional transportation in the amount that we got from the surplus. So ideally, we never got any more money for regional transportation. So it's frustrating because it's almost pulling the curtain over people's eyes, thinking we're going to get more money. In fact, they just play with the money in the House budget.
Like a shell game?
Yeah. And so it's frustrating. It's very frustrating. And then there was a big proponent and push for when it came to phone calls for inmates incarcerated in jail, right? And then back in, I believe it was during COVID, if I remember correctly, and I apologize, I have baby brain nowadays, so trying to remember the exact timeline, but we ended up funding inmates' phone calls. So it was like an unlimited ability for an inmate to call their family, friends, and loved ones on the other side of the wall. And we understood that there was a huge hardship, right? During COVID, people were being laid off from their jobs. People weren't able to support their loved ones that were incarcerated. And there was a need to have that communication to be able to hopefully rehabilitate some of the men and women that are in our prison system. However, I believe we fully funded it again, I think the year after COVID, the post-COVID era, and then it became incorporated into our budget where it's free phone calls for inmates. And having conversations with our sheriffs on both sides of the aisle, the concern is there's no safeguards put in place there, right? There's unlimited phone calls happening. There's from sunup to sundown. There's no rehabilitation happening because they're on the phone. They're not going to classes anymore. They're not taking any kind of outside educational programs to enrich themselves when they do get released from the prison system. And then also too, especially from a viewpoint of someone who has had someone in prison, that was my abuser, and he would find ways to call me. And I think about those victims and those people that are trying to live their lives on the outside, being called and harassed daily from sunup to sundown. So there was a big push to try to have a commission to really look at what those safeguards could be. It was shot down again, and I just have a hard time with fully funding that entity. That's another piece of the puzzle as far as the budget goes. And we could go down a whole list. Sure. We might be here the whole time as to why, I voted against the budget. Again, I do know and recognize that there are several pieces of that budget that were important and productive. That's why I voted for most, if not all, of the amendments. But overall, just because there's good pieces doesn't mean the whole thing is good. So, and that's the hard part, and that's always the decision you have to make at the end.
And just a quick follow-up in regards to the prisoners and phone calls. Is there also an effect on their recidivism that is a concern as well?
Yeah, there's always a concern. I don't know the data as far as how that goes, but I know having the conversations with the men and women that are more experts in that area, they're concerned. They're seeing less and less individuals sign up for, say, programs that would help them when they get released from the prison system. Less and less are doing that because they have, and it's not just phone calls, it's FaceTime, it's emails. And then you think of the concern on the other side of that coin is the public safety of it, right? If it's hard enough to monitor calls when they're restricted, right? When you have to pay for them and, it's costly, so you're not making as many phone calls. And back in the day, it was just dial on the phone. Now it's a video recording, it's emails that they have to monitor. I mean, that's like an impossible task for our men and women in the correctional facilities to monitor whether or not there's any criminal activity going on behind the walls, right? So that was another big concern with some of the sheriffs throughout our Commonwealth, is the public safety factor, that there are criminal entities still being run from behind the jail,
right?
Which is, it's crazy to think. It's almost like a HBO movie or something that you're watching. So our push was to not necessarily defund it, but it was to put some restrictions in place so that we protect everybody involved, including the individual behind, in a prison system, to be able to get them the help that they need to be able to be successful when they are released.
It's worth asking you, what kind of a message do you feel that your no vote sends to your constituents in your district?
I hope that the message I'm sending is that I'm trying to be fiscally conservative, right? That we're trying to, just because we have the money doesn't mean we need to be spending all the money, and be very mindful of where we're spending that money. I hope the message is that, I'm not just up there just to go along, to get along with the House, whether it be with the minority party or the majority party, that I'm really looking at how it's going to impact our communities. And it's important for me to think about the seniors in our community that are potentially looking at being unhoused because of potential overrides across over the next several years, right? And it's not just this fiscal year. We're going to be looking at it over the next several years because we're trying to come out of a hole that we've dug ourselves into. So I'm being mindful of those individuals. I'm being mindful of, someone like my nephew who has dyslexia, who's on a special education program, and thankfully is being homeschooled now, but has been failed by the school district that he grew up in. And so I'm thinking about those individuals when I take a vote, because I think it's important that we don't forget about those people that not necessarily always have a voice.
I want to kind of digress back to your duties on the House Ways and Means, and being a part of that, and knowing so that you're a mom.
Yeah.
And you're not just a mom of little Alina.
Yep.
But you also are a mom who's expecting.
Yes.
What has it been like for you to be a full-time working legislator?
Yep.
Have a child, and yet be expecting and still be traveling around. What has it been like? What was that like for you?
It's let's just say our family calendar became very active, and we leaned on our village very much so. And I'm so thankful for my husband, who's super supportive in what I do, and was able to kind of fix his schedule to really accommodate my busy schedule during those first, 6 to 8 weeks of the legislative session. Obviously there's not many women in the legislature that are similar to myself, that are deciding to start a family and raise a family while being a legislator. But I do want to show, it's important for me to show other girls and other women that we can do both, right? We can be very effective legislators and effective voices for our communities, but also be good moms, and that we don't have to choose one over the other, and that there's a way to do both. And that's important for me. I want to set the example for my daughter that you might not have everyone agree with you, but you believe in something, and you stick to that, and you voice your concerns, and to be strong in your voice. And so let's just say it's been a roller coaster, but it's been a fun roller coaster that we've been on. And I'm learning as we go. And thankfully, Alina is been very engaged in her civic duty. Early on, she debated on the House floor with me. There's a picture, and I'll never forget it. One of my girlfriends sent it to me, and she goes, "What the heck are you wearing?" And, it was from me debating on the House floor on the gun legislation. I think Alina might have been 10 or 11 weeks old by this point. And I said, "Well, I'm wearing Alina on the baby carrier." And then they zoomed in, and they were able to see that there was Alina's little head popping out. But it's important for me. And I know that one day when she gets older, I'm going to show her that picture and say, "Kid, you were
right there.
You were right there. You were in the thick of it, and you gave me the strength to be able to go forward and use my voice, because now I'm not just doing it for myself, I'm doing it for my children."
Kind of keeping family model going on here, but also blending in work. Your longtime aide,
Yep.
Catherine Mullen,
Yeah.
who you mentioned earlier on in our conversation, is actually a candidate for the East Bridgewater Select Board. I believe she's running unopposed.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about maybe a source of pride for you, seeing her step into the political arena.
You know, Catherine joined my office in 2019 as an intern, and I'll never forget that phone call from a good friend of mine. She said, hey, I have one of my friend's daughters is looking to get into, the State House and into politics and policy. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll take an intern. It was my first year. I didn't know what to expect, right? And wow, was I pleasantly surprised. She was this bubbly girl from East Bridgewater. And I say girl, but she was a grown woman. But to me, she, like I say it all the time, she's forever like 22 in my head. I say that's her age is always going to be. And so, so she came into the office and she was eager. I've never seen someone, especially someone not getting paid, to have so much drive. She had commitment. She wanted to learn and to see her grow. And then, she finished college, and her and I continued to stay in touch. She didn't, intern in the office anymore. And then an opportunity came available when my former aide, Curtis, decided to take some time off for law school. Who, shout out to him, he's actually graduating, or might have already graduated by now, from law school. And so I reached out to Catherine. I said, hey, you still, looking for a job? I'd love to have you as my legislative aide. We clicked very well when she was an intern. We remained friends throughout. And she was like, yeah, of course, I'd love to. And to see the person that she is, if you don't know her,
Very bubbly, upbeat.
Please get to know her. Her laugh is contagious.
Yep, very bubbly.
She will turn any bad day into a good day. And she genuinely is passionate, not just about East Bridgewater, her hometown where she grew up, where she loves, but the whole district. One of her favorite times of the month is our office hours, because we go to our senior centers, our COAs. And she just looks for, if she has another commitment that she can't go to our office hours, this girl will find a way to get to office hours, because the seniors in our community are just so important to her, having those conversations, having those relationships. So when the opportunity came available, Dave Sheedy, he's done a fantastic job for East Bridgewater, huge supporter of mine. I'm a huge supporter of his, said that he was thinking about not rerunning. And he looked at me at the Christmas parade in East Bridgewater and said, who would you think about running to replace me? And the both of us, we turned and we looked right over to Catherine. And he's like, I was thinking the same exact thing. And I was like, listen, I don't want her to feel pressured. I don't want her to think that she has to do it because of, working in the office or because of the relationship she has with you. I want her to do it because she wants to do it. And that's something that's important, especially for public service. You gotta want to do it, because if you don't, then it's going to feel like a job. And if something feels like a job, you don't like doing it, right? And that's for any career. And so I told her, I said, we're thinking about this. What's your thoughts? I said, take some time, talk to your mom, talk to your friends, talk to your loved ones, and really think about if this is something you would want to do. And she didn't hesitate. She was like, yeah, she was all in. And she goes, another way to serve my community. And the next step was making sure that she could do it, right, ethically to do both jobs. So we crossed our I's, crossed our T's, dotted our I's in regards to that. She made sure she knows what her restrictions are in her position as select woman, but also as legislative aide, and where she needs to balance it. And I have full faith that she's going to do a fantastic job as a select woman for the town of East Bridgewater, but also continuing as my legislative aide.
How does that solidify your office in the district, having someone who will now be serving on the select board as a select woman in East Bridgewater?
I think she'll bring a unique perspective to the board when she knows how the state government works, and then to learn exactly how the local government works, the town government works. I think, just like myself, she has a very clear passion for accountability, transparency, and accessibility. And I think she's going to bring that to East Bridgewater as much as she can. With obviously, there'll be some restrictions because of her being a legislative aide. She might not be able to send me emails from her, select woman's account. It might have to come from the other two members, but that doesn't mean she's not advocating. She'll continue to advocate for East Bridgewater in every way that she can. But I also think it'll be having that perspective within the office, for my office, is going to be a great one to have, because East Bridgewater is a very small community. It's a board of 3. And sometimes with the craziness of life, things get lost in transaction, and luckily that won't happen.
At the time of our conversation here, I believe all 3 towns have already had their town meetings.
Yep.
What are your thoughts as to how those how your respective communities are doing financially, or even some of the fun things that they're doing in the communities that maybe you've had a chance to attend, or at least be able to be have a presence there?
You know, I think all 3 communities are doing great jobs at bringing the towns together, especially in the warmer months, right? Abington does their Sunday music that they have right behind the studio.
Summer concerts,
yeah, the
summer concerts in the park.
Thank you. That's the baby brain kicking in where I can't get my words out.
I got you.
You know, and then we do Founders Day weekend, which is going to be a great, you know, event. And then East Bridgewater also does, you know, music on the common and having, you know, different events that take place throughout the town. And East Bridgewater, it's the 150th. And
Whitman.
I mean, sorry, Whitman. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Kevin's on it.
Yeah.
So Whitman's having the 150th, and unfortunately, we were just actually discussing this before taping. I missed the dinner because my stepdaughter actually got married, and I had, you know, of course, I had to be at that wedding. It was important for myself and our family that I was there. And then the parade, my little brother's actually getting married. So I promise you, I'm not making up the weddings. But they're going to have great events throughout the summer, which I look forward to. July 4th is another one.
Yep.
But as far as the budget goes, you know, it's hard because we're all counting our pennies, and we're all being mindful of what impact it's going to have. You know, Abington, it was surrounding trash. You know, East Bridgewater surrounding the MBTA zoning, and then Whitman, it's surrounding budget overrides, and looking at how this is going to have a trickle-down effect on everything, you know, all the way down to our public service, our DPW, our libraries, our COAs. You know, it's going to have an effect on everybody. But we need to be mindful of those that have lived in our community, built our community up, and making sure we're keeping them in mind when making those decisions. So it is tough. It's hard. It's hard because I wish I had a magic wand and I could, you know, make it all right. But unfortunately, it's the way the business goes, right? We gotta figure out where we're spending and how we can spend it maybe differently so that it's more effective long term.
Just got a couple of moments left here. If there's anybody who is watching in your 3 communities that wants to reach out or has a question, needs services, constituent services, what's some of the best ways for them to be able to kind of get in touch with your office or you?
Yeah, you know, the most effective way I think is through our email, and I know you'll probably put it up on the screen
so people, right now.
So people have it, right? So that's the most, you know, effective and quickest way, and it's alyson.sullivan@mahouse.gov. I know I have a hyphenated name, but I told a House counsel, please don't change my email. I don't want to screw anyone up. So it's still alyson.sullivan. And, you know, social media is obviously an easy way to get in touch with us. You know, my office, myself and Catherine are very available when it comes to state agencies. If there's an issue around unemployment or mass health or and even federal, you know, entities. We have a great, you know, relationship with our federal delegation that if there's an issue around federal issues, we have a great contacts that we can contact them. Sometimes we're able to get in touch with them a little bit quicker than some constituents are. So reach out to our office. You know, I always encourage the community to reach out whenever they have issues.
As always, as you've done for many years since being elected, we thank you for stopping by and sitting in front of the cameras and sharing the latest with what's going on. And we look forward to maybe talking to you. I think we're probably going to have to wait until the fall. Depending on, again, you're probably
with
expecting...
with how busy the state is going, and then also, too, just everything in district, you know, it's been hectic, but it's been a good busyness.
Well, thank you for your time as always.
Thank you, Kevin.
You got it. And thank you for tuning in to our program. Again, the idea is to keep you informed as to some of the things that are going on in and around your community and beyond. Until our next conversation, have a great day.